This is Reviving the Republic. I'm Brant. This is my co-host Justin. What's going on, man?
How you doing, bud?
Not bad, man. What's happening?
Not
So
a lot.
I got a. We'll start out with the hot seat question for you. This will be one that's kind of near and dear to you.
All right.
So what do you think about Steve Carell bailing out the Minneapolis protesters? That was the article I just read. Steve Carell and a bunch of other millionaires from TV or whatever are bailing out like these Minneapolis protesters that were rioting and all kinds of stuff. So.
Oh, okay. I see
I
what
know
you're
you
saying.
like the.
So they,
Yeah. I know you like
so
the.
they're bailing them. Yeah, I do like The Office a lot. So they're bailing them out of jail, is what you're saying.
That's my understanding of it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Man, what do I think about that? Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, I definitely like Michael, the character on The Office. I mean, I don't know how much of that transfers over to Steve Carell, but yeah, I mean that's kind of strange. I mean, just given the, I mean that's a tough situation. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, just talking about the protesters in general. I mean, a peaceful protest, I have no problem with. I mean, I understand people being angry.
Mm-hmm.
Plenty of problems with injustice in our world, and so I get that for sure. But then when it's taken to
I think you might be
people's
freezing up.
really, yeah, everything actually is freezing up. I don't know why.
Yeah,
We might
you
have to
sound good
start
now.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. My phone just had an orgasm, I think. But anyways, yeah, I mean it's unfortunate, at the same time to see it escalate to the point where people's property are getting damaged that don't have anything to do with it, and I would say that overall, they're not really doing any favors, to these people, uh, you know, you're not doing any favors or to the memory of the life that's lost there and the family. I mean, it's just a tough situation because I definitely don't want to be critical of the idea of protests, and like I said, I get it, people being out in the streets like that, but the damage to property and I mean the potential that there's professional agitators out there, that could be doing a lot of that stuff.
Right.
That's certainly not cool. But yeah, that's a tough question, man. I mean, it's I don't know. I mean, there's just so many mixed feelings, I think, and I really wish you didn't ask me that, to be honest.
Did it ruin your picture of Steve Carell a little bit?
I mean, yeah, it does. It doesn't help. I mean, without really knowing who got arrested and why. I mean, I guess that's hard to say, but
I was just hoping that would kick off a conversation with what was going on. It just seemed to fit. You know what I mean? And it leads
Right.
right into all the stuff that's going on, which is, yeah, obviously, protest is essential. It's part of our First Amendment, which should be held in high esteem. But on the other hand, man, it's just, it's ridiculous when you're burning down your own stores in your own city, man. I mean, these are your neighbors. You're burning their businesses down. It's
Right.
ridiculous. I've never understood that aspect of it. It's like, yeah, uh, be upset, sure. Yeah, get together, assemble, voice your disagreement with what happened. Yeah, man, that's all good stuff. But man, when you just start looking for reasons to loot and riot and you're burning your own businesses down, you know what I'm saying? These are people that worked hard to build these businesses up and serve you, and you're burning them down. It's
Right.
ridiculous. Um, on top of that, I can understand, I mean, obviously, yeah, with the Steve Carell thing, that was something I saw today. I really didn't even read the article. I just read the headline, so I don't know who he was bailing out. It does matter, you know. It matters. Hey, maybe it was just a regular protester for all I know. Maybe it was, someone who was unjustly thrown in jail. I don't know. I just saw the article. But I also saw where pallets of bricks were being just they were just appearing by like the county building and stuff like that. Pallets full of bricks. There was a video where a guy he was doing like a selfie video in front of this pallet of bricks that just showed up in front of the county building. He's like, "Where'd these bricks come from, man?" He's like, "What is it?" And it's a whole pallet of bricks, like right outside the court building or something like that. And it's like, yeah, I wonder where those came from. I wonder if George Soros didn't have something to do with that, or some of these groups that are funding that just seem to be funding all the civil unrest that's taken place over the last 10 years or probably longer. So
Right.
that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's strange for sure. Man.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
crazy.
you know, yeah, it's a shame, that it's getting taken that far,
Hmm.
you know.
It is, and at the same time, you got to look at the whole situation. I It's terrible. It's terrible to see that video of the cop kneeling on the guy's neck for I think it was 8 minutes and something.
Yeah.
But and to keep kneeling on his neck after the guy was completely unresponsive, there's just
Right.
and there is no excuse for that.
No.
Do I think he did it on purpose? Man, I don't think he honestly, I mean, I don't know. I don't know if he did or not. And I mean, probably wasn't like an intentional thing where, yeah, I'm just going to kill this son of a bitch. You know what I mean? It was certainly negligent. I mean, just out of the ballpark negligent and maybe even a little
Right.
power trippy. You know what I'm saying? But I don't know. I just don't know if it was going through his head yeah, I'm going to kill this dude right here. But I mean, honestly, regardless, it doesn't make that much difference because it was disgusting either way you looked at it.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's a bad deal, man, and I haven't really watched a lot of TV lately, honestly, so I don't know a lot about the situation. I had heard that um he's a cop that had several, it was like 15 or 16 complaints about him being overly violent,
Mm,
you know, and um I don't know if this is in the context of his job as a cop or his job as a bouncer. Um, but I heard that he was like really quick to use the pepper spray, things like
mm,
that. When I heard it, I assumed it was in the bouncer situation, but I don't really know. I mean, do they give bouncers pepper spray? Maybe it was his job as a cop. I'm not really sure, but he had a
Yeah,
little
I'm
bit
not.
of a
I'm
checkered
not sure.
history going from what I understand, and you know, like you mentioned today, I mean, these guys were both bouncers at the same bar. It
Right.
looked like a pretty big bar, so it's hard to say if they knew each other or how well, but that's kind of a strange detail too. Um, well, yeah, I mean, it's horrible. It's a horrible thing to watch, and it's really the, well, I don't know if it's the first time, but it's definitely one of those. I don't remember seeing something that close up where you just can sit there and watch as this dude just continues to have this guy in this awful position and beyond, you know, the point of necessity for sure. I mean, and there's plenty of video. You can't really tell um, exactly what happened. It actually looks like, you know, when you're watching it on the security camera and they take him across the street and over to the other cruiser where they eventually hold him down, you can see that he kind of gets to the curb and he falls down. Now, I don't know if he like stepped off the curb, you know, didn't see it or something and fell down, or fell down for some other reason. But yeah, I mean, you just don't know between where that cuts off and the other one picks up where or how they got him out on the street side of the vehicle
Yeah.
and pinned down like that, and why they felt like they needed to do that. But certainly, you know, he kept his knee on his neck way longer than he needed to, and it almost looked like there was a point there, if you watch the body language, that he almost was pushing harder in spite of the people that were trying to stop him. You know, like when I first heard about this, a buddy of mine told me about it, and I thought, man, if I'd have been there, I would have like done everything I could to stop the cop from doing that. You know, because I think all I'd seen at that point was a picture, and you could see there was people standing there.
Yeah.
And then after I watched the video, I see that they were trying to, and if they had got any closer, they would have got tasered or pepper sprayed or whatever. And they're, you know, they had the one cop that was kind of playing security guard for the other two that were holding the guy down. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean it. I only watched the video once because that was all I really wanted to see, but it seemed like the more the people that were kind of trying to urge him to get off the guy, uh, the more he pressed on the guy's neck. So who knows, man? You just never know what's going through people's head, and obviously that was wrong. And you know, I guess to circle back again, I mean, I understand the protest. I think that. And honestly, to some extent, I understand the damage to the police headquarters or whatever the building happened to be called. I mean, in some sense, I get that, but like Luton Target and all these other buildings and stuff like that, it's like, come on, guys, it's like a bunch of you know, kids that never grew up. I mean, some of these people you're seeing on the street too that are acting, you know, relatively foolish in my opinion. I mean, they're 40, 45 years old. It's like, what are you
Yeah.
doing, man? You know, so
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy too. And I'm trying to look it up right now. Um, you know, race always gets brought into this. You know,
mm, yeah.
anytime there's any type of police brutality issue, especially when it's directly a white cop against a black man, race gets brought into it, no doubt. And I mean, you, to an extent, you know, you kind of expect that, but I mean, look at what was the race of the other cops that were standing there. You know,
Well, we had a pretty good spectrum there. I mean, the guy that essentially had his knee in the guy's neck. I mean, he was obviously Caucasian, but I think I know that there was Asian and an African American, and I think there was one other one. I don't know. I guess I don't know
Yeah,
what
yeah.
the
I think
fourth
there
cop
was,
was.
and I don't want to speculate, but just what I heard. He had obviously the white guy that had his knee on his neck. I think there's the Asian guy who's right in the middle, right, or in between the people, and then I think they said there was a black cop, and then there was a Mexican cop or a
Mm,
Hispanic cop, whatever it was. But I mean, it did seem like a broad spectrum, and as far as I'm concerned, they're just as guilty for letting that happen. I mean, obviously, the majority of the responsibility lies on the guy who did it. But
right.
you know, those guys could see what was going on and they did nothing. You know,
Hmm.
um. So I mean, man, I don't think it does any good to automatically go to making it a race issue. That's exactly what the mainstream media wants to happen, and that's exactly
Hmm.
why they're fueling. They're not doing anything to stop these riots. They're fueling them along. You
Hmm.
know, I don't think it does any good to do that. I mean, look, yeah, um, people from every single race and creed have stuff like this happen to them. Like I can pull up articles right now about, you know, who was the white kid in the hotel that was just brutally gunned down because the guy said he was scared because he thought the kid reached for his waistband. When I mean, you can see him follow every single direction that the dude gave him, and then he just unloads on him. He was like a 20-year-old kid or something like that. And there was one not too long ago, I think in Florida, where almost the same thing happened to him as George Floyd. I mean, it's all sad, you know. But the
Hmm.
last thing I think that needs to be done is for it to be turned into a race issue simply because the media gets a hold of it and turns it into this propaganda that's just divide and conquer propaganda. I just don't think it really serves the whole of humanity to do it. I mean, things should be taken on an individual basis. You know what I'm saying? That's just how I feel
Right.
about it. Even if there is a race element to it, it doesn't do any good to blow it up in the media the way they're doing it and to cause all this division and then to spur on the riots and stuff like that. These riots don't do any good. You're hurting if you're talking about, like, for instance, specifically, if you're talking about, you know, if you're talking about the black community in this instance, it's not doing any good to go out and burn and loot black businesses that are in your town. You know, it just doesn't do any good to do that. It's hurting your town. Your town's going to take longer to recover. There's a way to handle it. You know what I mean? That's just how I feel personally.
Yeah. 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 I can't disagree. And I mean the thing about the whole fuel and the race war thing. I mean, like you said, it doesn't do anything good for the betterment of humanity. I mean, if there's injustice, then yeah, I mean, it needs to be pointed out, for sure.
Yeah, yep,
And there is injustice. I mean, let's face it,
sure.
there is injustice. Everybody faces their, um, you know, certain amounts of injustice in their life. I mean, life isn't fair. Um, but to
Right.
turn that into simply a one-dimensional problem, um, as the media tends to do, yeah, it's not doing us any of us any good. I mean, um, yeah, I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to do that unless you have another agenda, and I suspect that that is the case. So,
Yeah. In fact, it wasn't too long ago that we were talking on the phone when all this COVID-19 stuff came along. And that's actually another aspect we should get into because since this started happening, they're kind of using this as a diversion to, like, take people's minds off the whole COVID-19 thing while they secretly keep slipping in new little policies for COVID-19. They just don't want us paying attention to it anymore because people were kind of paying too much attention to it. So, people were waking up to it to a large degree. So, what better time for something like this to happen? And that's the point I was trying to make is we talked about this before when this COVID-19 stuff, we had a conversation, and I remember us talking about how, just wait, because after this COVID-19 stuff comes, after they get us used to authoritarianism and following all these directions, just wait, because it won't be too much longer. They're going to start the race war stuff again. And you're going to see the media just spurring on this divide and conquer type of stuff, really, really trying to ramp up tensions between different classes and different races of people. And here we are.
Yeah, exactly. Then that's exactly what happened, and legitimate opportunity to do so. But I agree with you. It's not the thing to stress and to push. I mean, the media is supposed to be a tool, for the betterment of our greater society, and it's far from that, unfortunately.
Right. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, we are one people. We're all humans. All you do by consistently bringing up all the things that make us different and then trying to play those cards. I don't care whether it's race, whether it's the gay thing, whether it's, whatever it is, whatever little card that they use in order to fuel that division. It's the oldest trick in the book. They're doing it for a purpose. They're doing it because it gets the result they want, and it divides us, and it keeps us bickering over these issues that if we just look a little bit deeper, we'd realize that these issues are with all of humanity. But what they do is they single one out and then specifically pin it on a group of people, whether it's, they do it with the gay community, they do it with the black community, they do it, any chance they get, they do it. And it's to create that division. When if we just simply say everyone has rights, they're called human rights. And if something happens to anybody, it's a problem. If any injustice happens to anybody, it's a problem. But when you start dividing people and making them a member of a protected group, that sounds good on the surface, but all it does is it creates more separation. And then it gives this excuse to then have that separation when the original goal wasn't separation. The individual goal was not to have separation. But then they do the antithesis of what they're trying to do, or at least what they say they're trying to do. They actually do the antithesis of it by creating a protected class, which then solidifies the division. It's very slick. It's real slick propaganda, because on the surface you're saying we're trying to help these people. We don't want there to be any type of division. They feel marginalized, and then what do? They go ahead and marginalize them even more under the guise of helping them. That's how I see it. Where if we want things to be equal, let's just make them equal. Let's just make them equal. Say everybody's got human rights. It doesn't matter what race you are, what gender you are, what persuasion you are. I mean, it's simple. The more you add, the more laws you make pertaining to a certain division of people, the more it separates those people, even though it's under the guise of looking out for the people. And then they play off those separations to keep everybody divided. And it's so easy. It's like the oldest tactic in the book.
Right. Yeah, and when you talk about equality, the equality that you want is the equality at the level of potential, not at
Hmm.
the level of outcome, and it could, I mean, simply because the equality at the level of outcome is actually impossible. And,
Right.
but having that equal potential as best you can anyway. I mean, you're never going to have that, man. There's so many different variables involved, but to do your best anyways as a society to create that equal potential for everybody. Um, as far as your structures of society are concerned, I mean, that's again, there's so many things that enter into that you can't control. Intelligence being an obvious one. I mean, just some people are born more intelligent than other people, and I mean, it's been worked on quite a bit, but I mean, there's been nothing that has actually given a positive change to that. And there's just nothing you can do. Some people are just not born with the faculty to have the same opportunities as everybody else. So
Right. I mean, you might have some people that are born more intelligent. You might have someone who's born more attractive. You might have someone who's born taller, which is good for certain things. You might have someone who's born shorter, which is good for other things. You know what I'm saying? Like you might have someone who's born fast and then they become a track star. You might have someone who's born naturally a good swimmer. I mean, all these things, they happen. That's a part of life, right? I mean, we're different. So you're going to have this, but everyone ought to have the same opportunity to participate in whatever they want. And then, let the chips fall where they may. And then that's just what it is. But when you try to force equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity, that's where you run into this problem of trying to force equity on a society. You can't do that.
right,
It actually, if you want things to be fair, that's not going to do it. That actually does the opposite. That makes things unfair. It's rigging the deck, is what it's doing. You know.
right, yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that doesn't work out for the benefit of anybody, even though it seems like it might at first. Um, and the great thing about a free society with free markets, I mean, it creates that environment where there's going to be several different hierarchies for you to climb. So, like you said, there's going to be a lot better chance for there being something for everybody. You know,
Hmm.
so
Yeah, and it's been shown. You know, uh, you could take and you could level the playing field today and say, okay, look, we're going to divvy out the money. We're going to give everyone an equal amount of money. We're going to give everybody an equal job. We're going to give everybody an equal house. And then we're basically going to hit the reset button. And you know what? In I don't know how long it would take, but 10 years, maybe less, maybe longer, you're going to have a minority of people with the majority of the stuff. That's the Pareto distribution. And it's just shown that it's going to happen. It's a natural occurrence. And I know Jordan Peterson talks some about that, but
yeah,
from what I
yeah,
understand, just kind of the natural way things tend to unfold.
yeah. I mean, there's a factor or a ratio, I guess, where any form of production or whether yeah any form of production, it can be artistic, manufacturing, whatever. I mean, any form of output, you're going to wind up with um what is it, the square root of the total is going to do half the work. So if you got 10 people working for a company, roughly 3 people are going to do half the work. But if you got 100 people working for a company, 10 people are going to do half the work. you know 1,000 people, what's that? It's like 33 people or something like that will do half the work. Like it can be shown. I mean, there's an experiment that's done with crowds, and it goes something like everybody pretends like they have 10 invisible bananas, and you go around and and people just flip coins back and forth, and if and you call it in the air, whatever, it's just randomized. If you win, they got to give you one of their invisible bananas, and before you know it, a small number of people have all the bananas. I mean, it just,
Yeah.
for whatever reason, it happens to work out that way,
Right.
and one thing I was going to say about like what you said, I mean, because it's a nice idea to think that, wouldn't it be great if we could hit the reset button, make everybody equal, you know, um, and really, I mean, there's some old saying that goes something like, we'll make everybody equal and we'll all equally starve to death. And unfortunately, that's how it plays out. I mean, you have to have that potential to better your position, or there
Right.
isn't the drive to produce.
Right. There's absolutely no incentive to push yourself to do something greater if the incentive's taken away. And that's exactly, I mean, that kind of leads into the discussion of what is taking place right now with all the socialism being fueled in America, which, I mean, who would have ever thought that we'd be sitting in America today with open socialists trying to put forth their plans when we know exactly what socialism's done throughout the years, to these other countries, and it is just open in your face, and you've got half the population actually cheering for it and begging for it. I mean, look at all the stuff that's going on that you would never think would happen in the United States. And what it's going to do is, if they get their way, you're going to completely eviscerate the middle class, which is part of the socialist plan. It's kind of happening right now, right beneath everybody's noses. It's happening. Um, so you get rid of the middle class. You create two classes. You create a class of elites and a class of the poor, and then everybody's equally poor, and everything's nationalized. So you take away the incentive for anybody to actually be able to gain a leg up and be able to compete, because all the competition is taken away, and there's no incentive then for anyone to produce anything new. The government picks the winners and losers.
Right.
So, and that's where we're headed right now, and we're a good ways down the road, and this COVID-19 thing hasn't helped anything at all, and in fact it's just made it much worse. I mean, we get into that too, because that's a whole story in and of itself.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually amazing, um, that we are in that kind of situation. Just given what you know what the free markets have built for us, in a society that functions as well as ours does, that you would want to, you know, at least metaphorically burn that down and try socialism, you know, it's just insane to me. And then, like you said, with the pandemic, I mean, what a perfect, if you look at it from the point of view, um, from a globalist point of view, I mean, what better situation could you ever ask for, uh, than something like this to usher in your plans? I mean, and as we both know, I mean, it's written about. I mean, it's not like they hide it, that a pandemic would be the perfect situation roll this kind of stuff out, and they're doing it, you know. So it's not just like hypothetically this could be bad for us. Like, they are running plays right out of the playbook on us right now. Like, there's no question about that. And so you can either turn a blind eye to it, or try to reason it out some other way, like there's some other excuse, or be sympathetic to the idea that there's a pandemic out there. Like, we're lucky that this isn't a real serious virus causing really serious consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Because then, I mean, literally, what would you do then about it? You know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, exactly.
at least with this being the case, I mean, if you're healthy, I mean, quite literally, you should just go back to work and go back to your normal life. It'd
Yeah,
be the best thing that you can do for yourself and for everybody else, you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. And I've heard it speculated that, this is just the event that is going to get the framework in place. So when the next event comes, then they've got the framework, and they're going to really roll it out then, and really, really crank down with the tyranny at that point. I mean, even Bill Gates has been on TV saying things to that effect, like, oh yeah, well, this is just the beginning. This is just to get the framework in place. This is just to get you to understand what you're supposed to do. Then when the real one hits, then we're gonna isolate you and come and send the contact tracers to your door, and maybe remove you and isolate you to a quarantine camp, because it's just what we got to do for your safety. It's just to keep you safe. You know that, right? Just to keep you safe.
Right.
So yeah, I don't trust any of that. Especially, you can watch Bill Gates interview with Stephen Colbert, and Colbert is just up there like, oh, Bill, you warned us about this one. Man, you really did predict this. And of course, Gates is up there, and he's like, well, I take no pride in this. It's not like I wanted this to happen, but now,
Yeah.
since it did, oh my gosh, get ready for the next. The next one's probably going to be a bioweapon attack. I mean, he's like literally just happy as can be, happier than a pig in shit, rolling
Right.
around. I mean, it's ridiculous with this pink sweater. I mean,
Yeah, he can hardly contain himself, man. It's pretty telling.
that's ridiculous, man.
And
And I
he's got
mean,
to know, he's got to see that there's so many people hating on him, you know what I mean?
oh
And to
yeah,
still go on there and act like that. I mean, whatever, I
it's
guess.
ridiculous. Yeah, I mean, yeah, from what I understand, like, his Instagram pages and his Facebook pages are like 99% hate. Just like, nope, ain't no way Bill Gates is raping me with that needle. Like, I ain't going for it. You know what I mean? So
Hmm.
I think that's a good thing. And another good thing that we could talk about too is Donald Trump did just totally defund the WHO. He
Oh, did
froze
he?
it at first. Yeah. Yeah, he froze it at first, and he wrote that letter to Tedros, I think it was, talking about, you know, you guys have been very China centric and whatnot. And, it just seems like you're not really working for the US and everything. I'm paraphrasing, obviously, but
Hmm.
he said, we're going to freeze all of the funding that we send to the WHO, and we're going to give you an opportunity to do the right thing here. And if you don't, then we're going to pull funding completely. Well, just recently, within the last week, Trump has decided to completely pull all funding from the WHO. So, regardless of what you think about Trump, I know I've been critical of him. I've also thought some of the things he's done have been good. I look at each individual uh, instance and judge what I think about that instance. I'm not like all on the Trump train or, you know, or not. It's just, it's a case by case basis. So like,
Right.
yeah, I mean, he's done some stuff I agree with. He's done some other stuff that I'm like, man, what's that about? I mean, in very small cases, there's been, it doesn't happen often, but there is sometimes where Democrats will come out and surprise me and I'll be like, yeah, I can agree with that. I'll
Right.
mostly agree with the libertarian point of view, but not always. There's libertarians that come out and I'm like, wow, this dude's like, sounds like a radical leftist, like a communist or a socialist, and I don't agree with that. So,
Yeah. I think that's a key thing to understand, and hopefully people start moving towards, is just looking at things on a individual issue basis and stop fighting for these teams and just being swept over by ideology. Like,
mhm,
step outside of that and realize that probably every perspective has a point to make in there somewhere, and if you can separate the wheat from the chaff a little bit more, um, then we can get back to working together and trying to steer the ship and the unpredictable snake that we're trying to ride on. So
mhm, right, and that's why I like historically. That's why I've liked the libertarian perspective more than either of the extremes. Is because if you can get an actual libertarian, someone who's sensible, like a Ron Paul or something like that. And when I use the term libertarian, I'm generally speaking in the sense of a Ron Paul. I mean, the last I checked, I mean, I read some article where there's like 19 different types of libertarians, so it's kind of hard to pin down. But when I say libertarian, I mean Ron Paul. I mean that way of thinking, Austrian economics, kind of, just basically about free market economics and personal liberty. That's what I view a libertarian as, and where libertarians do it right is they take issues that are on the left and on the right. They take the ones that it's like they cut the fat off both of the sides. You know what I mean? It's like you got propaganda on both the left and the right, and you got all this stuff that you got to wade through and dig through. Whereas the libertarian perspective is kind of like, yeah, let's just get rid of all that nonsense and all the bullshit and just focus on the actual issues in an honest way. So that's like a Ron
mhm.
Paul type, That's I mean, it's just the truest way of looking at it. At least it has been for me. But anyway.
Yeah, I agree.
Now for people that are not familiar with what you brought up a little bit ago, you brought up the fact that they've actually written papers on this stuff in regards to the COVID-19 thing, in regards to a pandemic. And it hasn't just
Mhm.
been one paper. I mean, they've run multiple simulations on these scenarios that would involve a pandemic, you know. So I've got the lockstep document pulled up right now, and this was a paper put out by the Rockefeller Foundation in 2010, and they listed a bunch of different scenarios, and this was for the future of development of technology. So it's basically a way for them to roll out these different technologies that they want to roll out. And how can they do that? And mainly these technologies are very what's the word I'm looking for? Very intrusive and surveillance based. They might present them to you in a good way, like, oh, look, you're not going to have to carry a wallet around because you're going to have a microchip inserted in you just like Bill Gates' new, his new patent he put out, which, I mean, just happens to be patent number 666. And I'm not making any judgment on that. Maybe that's just the way it fell. But honestly, that is the patent number. You know what I mean?
Well, it's kind of funny that that bill they're trying to pass is, what is that, the contact tracers, right?
Yeah,
That's what
yeah.
that, or is that bill? Which bill is that?
No, like, look, okay, so the patent number for Bill Gates' implantable digital currency is patent number 2020, because it's the year 2020. So it's 2020 060606. That's Bill Gates' patent number
Okay.
for the patent of the implantable digital currency that will track your bodily functions, your respiration, your perspiration, your heart rate, all this stuff. This little microchip will detect, so it knows exactly what movements you're making and how hard you're working and stuff like that. And then based on the task that you're doing, it will just automatically pay you and add money to your chip that's in your body. So, I mean, I can pull that up in a minute too, and we can read through that. But it's crazy. And the bill you're talking about is House Bill 6666. And that is the Trace Act that they're trying to pass right now. So that's the one for the contact tracing, where they're just like, get ready for the contact tracing, get ready for the armies of brown shirts we're going to send. Yeah. So.
Yeah, that's not good.
That's not good at all. I mean, can you even imagine? It's kind of going right along with what we were talking about earlier about the pandemic response. I mean, you really think that all this is just organically unfolding, and it's like, oh, we weren't prepared, but by golly, we're gonna unroll this stuff. I mean, it's just it's such a tragedy that this happened, but we're just coming up with this stuff on the fly, like this Trace Act, and oh yeah, these implantable chips, and getting the armies of the brown shirts ready to come and harass you, and oh, the digital technology where now your phone, it's going to alert you and the people around you, and our contact tracers are going to be informed of it, but it's just for your safety, and like, we can't even tell you who you were in contact with, but our contact tracers are going to take care of that, and they're just going to call you up and come and interview you and meet you at your home, and if deemed necessary, they're going to take you from your home. And don't worry, though, we've got quarantine camps with some real comfortable beds for you, and we're going to take you there, and probably your family too, because you were around them, and it's just what we got to do to keep you safe from this cold. We got to keep you safe from this cold. We heard you had the sniffles today, Mr. McNeil. We're going to have to talk to you. Come and get you from work, pull you outside in the parking lot, probably make you bend over and cough, and I mean everything, because after all, I mean, you could give somebody a cold. Those sniffles,
Yeah, it does.
hey, it's sniffles today, and it's a sore throat tomorrow. So we got to make sure that don't happen.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for sure, it's reasonable. Yeah.
Oh, it's more than reasonable.
That's good. That's good that they are looking out for us like that. And how great is it that, like, basically all these programs were well in place before any of this happened? I mean,
yeah.
So it's weird. It's weird how they say they weren't prepared. That I struggle with understanding that one, because they seem like they were plenty prepared. They had all this technology ready to roll out. all these plans in place. I think even that first stimulus bill had started before any of this
Yeah,
happened. I don't know how
yeah,
the hell
like
they did that either.
right.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, they war gamed it last fall. I mean,
Yeah, like
seems like they were prepared,
yeah,
but
of
then it's like we weren't prepared, and it's all Trump's fault, by the way. And
course.
yeah, stands to reason.
Yeah, it's like we war gamed it in Event 201, by the way, funded by Bill Gates, just magically. You know, why does Bill Gates just end up in every little scenario? Like all the, you know what? It's been a long time since I heard from Bill Gates. Like before all this stuff started really happening. Now he's on every station. Why is that? Why is that? He's the one that funded the Event 201. Why is that? I mean, he just happens to come up with Event 201 3 months before this happens. Just so happens he's tied into like the WHO, the Rockefeller Foundation, which, by the way, war gamed this scenario in 2010, which we'll get into in a second here. But
Mm-hmm.
it's, in Event 201, they broke down everything that's happening right now. The same response that they broke down in Event 201 is what we are doing now.
Right. Somehow they even knew that there would be like this horrible rash of conspiracy theories. They called that one too.
Oh yeah, yeah. Anytime you want to debunk someone who might be on to you, you call them a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah,
It's been
and
pretty
yeah,
effective up until now, but I think their days are numbered on that one too.
yeah, I would hope so. It gets pretty freaking obvious.
Yeah, I mean it's crazy. Then you get into like the Fauci connections and how Fauci's tied to Gates and the Clinton Foundation, the WHO, the CDC, all this. I mean, it's a lot of coincidences to just have there be nothing to it. I mean, statistically speaking, how many coincidences can happen before it's not a coincidence anymore?
Right.
You know, and this document right here, this lockstep document, was created in 2010, and this is a document on the future development of technology, and they broke down different scenarios that that they kind of war gamed through, and one of them is called lockstep, and it calls for, and this is a quote, a world of tighter top-down government control and more authoritarian leadership with limited innovation and growing citizen pushback. That's like the main caption underneath the title of the lockstep portion of the document.
Mm.
And I mean, some of this stuff is just crazy. It says in 2012 the pandemic that the world had been anticipating for years finally hit. Unlike 2009's H1N1, this new influenza strain originating from wild geese was extremely virulent and deadly. Even the most pandemic prepared nations were quickly overwhelmed when the virus streaked around the world, infecting nearly 20% of the global population and killing 8 million in just 7 months. The majority of them healthy young adults. The pandemic also had a deadly effect on economies. International mobility of both people and goods screeched to a halt, debilitating industries like tourism, breaking global supply chains. Even locally, normally bustling shops and office buildings sat empty for months, devoid of both employees and customers. The pandemic blanketed the planet. Though disproportionate numbers died in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Central America, where the virus spread like wildfire in the absence of official containment protocols. I just want to stop right there because you know how many people in Africa are going to die from this, and not just Africa, but the third world. There's another document where they talk about depopulation of the third world being paramount to their agendas of a world government. It's just interesting. I mean, we've talked so many times on how many of these things they do right now just do not make sense if you're actually trying to save lives. But it makes a lot of
Right.
sense if you're trying to depopulate, which is what they also write about.
Right.
It's crazy, man. The United States' initial policy of strongly discouraging citizens from flying proved deadly in its leniency, accelerating the spread of the virus, not just within the US, but across borders. Now, who was it originally when this pandemic hit who was saying, no, keep allowing flights in from China? In fact, hug a Chinese person when they get off the plane just to show you're not racist. Who was that? Was it Trump or was it the Democrat? And I'm not even a Republican Democrat dude, but it's just like it's just it's just what happened. And it was Trump who actually stopped the flights in from China like faster than anybody even wanted him to. In fact, they gave him a ton of shit for doing it. But
All right.
who was the one who was pushing the leniency? You know, it was the radicals.
Yeah.
This is this is an important part. However, a few countries did fare better. China, in particular. The Chinese government's quick imposition and enforcement of mandatory quarantines for all citizens, as well as its instant and near hermetic sealing off of all borders, saved millions of lives, stopping the spread of the virus far earlier than in other countries and enabling a swifter post-pandemic recovery. There's the praise of China that's always in these big globalist documents. And it's no wonder because the Rockefeller Foundation, and I mean, David Rockefeller in particular, always praised China. And so has, I think, Zbigniew Brzezinski, I think Kissinger also has, all these big globalist generals have always praised China and helped actually build the Chinese communist model and praised it as the future of the world. So, and what did we do here after this pandemic hit? What did we do?
Right.
We basically imported the Chinese model over here. That's unprecedented in America to take away our rights the way we did. It's insane.
Yeah. Yeah. It's out of control.
China's government was not the only one that took extreme measures to protect its citizens from the risk and exposure. During the pandemic, national leaders around the world flexed their authority and imposed airtight rules and restrictions, from the mandatory wearing of face masks to body temperature checks at entries to communal spaces like train stations and supermarkets. Even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. In order to protect themselves from the spread of increasingly global problems, from pandemics and transnational terrorism to environmental crises and rising poverty, leaders around the world took a firmer grip on power. It's like exactly what's happening right now, led by the same people, by the way, because Gates is just basically a Rockefeller Foundation protege. He's always worked very tight with them. They have the same ideology of globalism and world government.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, just is this all coincidence? Maybe people do think it's all coincidence. I find it kind of hard to believe. You can talk about this stuff for years. You can go back and watch documentaries from 2007 where smart people who were, having an eye on this stuff for a long time actually broke it down. Like, you watch, they're going to use a pandemic as their pretext to bring in all these draconian measures. It'll be led by Bill Gates. They're importing China's model here. I mean, this has been predicted by a lot of good documentary filmmakers over the years. So I just find it too much of a coincidence that it's always the same people, it's always the same players we're talking about, it's always these globalists, and their public position has always been praise China, bring the Chinese model here to America, and, they want that model here. It's basically come here, and the end goal has always been forced vaccinations and digital chips implanted under the skin to be able to track and trace you. What a perfect pretext for it.
Right. Well, and have the system in place that has the capabilities and the cameras to really seriously track you everywhere. Face recognition everywhere, you know. I mean, some of the stuff you could see coming just at Walmart for the last
Yeah,
handful of years, you know. I
right,
mean,
exactly.
they're obviously in on it too. I mean, it's the slow roll that's been moving forward, moving forward, moving forward, and now the pandemic finally hit, whether it's accidental or on purpose, and now it's time to hit the gas. I mean, no doubt that's why Bill Gates stepped down from his position
Mm-hmm.
at Microsoft. It's time. It's game time now, boys.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
we've been in spring training for a while, and
Yep.
you know, opening days finally come. Here we go. And
Right.
yeah, I mean, the little fucker can't hardly contain himself in interviews. While, you know,
Yeah.
supposedly the
Uh,
tragedy, and it is a tragedy, that people are dying, but, I'm not
mhm.
exactly sure that there's more people dying that already would be dying anyway from all this different shit. That's another thing about this is that they're coming right out and telling you how liberal they're being um, with the death certificates and just in general with the diagnosis. I mean, fuck, just about anything can be called COVID-19, and I think there's deep reasons for that that go just beyond making sure the numbers are high enough to get those good juicy numbers on the TV screens for you. I think it goes way
Mhm.
beyond that, and I think that Judy Mikovits is put a finger on it. At least for me. I mean, I'm sure she was well aware before any of this happened, but listen to some of the stuff that she's had to say has really put it into perspective for me why it seems like all of a sudden every ailment is now COVID-19. And if you really dig deep into what she's talking about long enough, like I have, the gears will start to click together, and it makes perfect sense what's going on as far as that end of things go. You know that they're
Mhm.
they're using this to cover up uh, some seriously inhumane shit that's been ignored because um, you know profits are at stake certainly, but also admission of guilt or even just mistakes seems to be not worth the health of the human people. So
Mhm. Right. Just to add to what you were saying there, speaking about every single thing being added to the COVID-19 list, Washington health official says state counted some gunshot victims as COVID-19 deaths. So, and there's other reports of this, people dying in car accidents, people dying from cancer. I mean, when you said their liberal way of doing this, I mean, yeah, they're being super liberal with it. It's like, it's just anything. You know what I mean? They're taking liberty to, oh, this person had cancer and they tested positive for COVID-19 after they died and they were already on their deathbed with stage 4 cancer, COVID-19 death. Some of them, they didn't even actually administer the test.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them, they just, oh yeah, they coughed. Oh yeah, COVID-19. Oh, this gunshot victim. Uh, yeah, asked. I don't know. I'm just speculating here, but I mean, this is like how it's happening. Probably asked his parents. Yeah, did he have a runny nose or anything like that in the previous week? Was he coughing? Do you think he had a cold? Yeah, COVID-19. Or sometimes they just test them after they died from like a gunshot wound to the head, and it's like, oh yeah, well, he tested for COVID-19, even though we know he was gunned down in the street brutally. COVID-19 death.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Well,
and there's other. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I read a scientific article today, a study that was talking about, the testing and things like that. That was part of the paper was the testing, and so one of the problems that they found is that you get anywhere from 30 to 60% false negative. So you have this problem where the virus might be there, but the test doesn't pick it up. So how they fixed that was they widened the spectrum that would bring about a positive test with no mention, at least in this paper, and obviously if that's what they did, there's no concern for the opposite problem that would obviously cause, which is a bunch of false positives. So just
Yeah,
because you got tested and you got a positive result doesn't even mean that you actually have it. Eh, Besides the fact, I mean, there's a virus out there. That's the thing. But COVID-19, the disease, it doesn't actually fulfill Koch's postulates. Everybody that gets the virus doesn't get the disease. So that right there tells you that something's up here. There's something about it where the virus doesn't automatically cause the disease, which means that the virus doesn't cause the disease. But there must be more to it than that. And again, I gotta turn people to Judy Mikovits because she's got that explanation for why that is, and it, it makes a lot of sense. Um, what she has to say about that. So
right. I've seen some of her stuff, and I think people should definitely look into her, especially since she was directly involved with Tony Fauci. I mean, that's a whole story in and of itself that I think people really should check out. Um,
yeah,
you know, there's that documentary they keep taking down from YouTube. I think they were calling it Plandemic the first time, and then I think they retitled it Doctors in Black. But I mean, just for anybody listening, check it out. And I mean, I'm sure a lot of people have seen it by now. But for those who haven't seen it, check it out because, you know, they've tried to run a smear campaign on her and say that all of her claims are baseless. But when you really start digging into it, I forget which interview it was. I heard a really good interview where she addresses all those. It might have been a London Reel or a Valuetainment. I can't remember which one. It was one of her more recent ones, but I mean, people can find it, I'm sure, or maybe not.
yeah,
I don't know.
right.
Maybe it's
Well,
completely scrubbed from the internet by now, but
right. The London Real interview, the most recent one, was pretty good, where they actually had there was an article, I think it was in Science that was basically attempting to debunk her, which of course the scientific establishment's version of debunking something is personal defamation and calling somebody a conspiracy theorist. That's usually the amount of it, and and that's essentially what they did. And they do, you know, her and Brian Rose kind of go over that, and then she actually shows, um, you know, the answer to the things that they suggest, in that article. So that was good, and that might not even be the one that you're referring to. I know she's done a lot of interviews lately. I do think she's been on Valuetainment at least once, and she actually mentioned in that London Real interview, that she was supposed to go on Valuetainment. I think again, I'm pretty sure she's already been on it once, but she was supposed to go on there and have a discussion with another scientist of some sort, um, and they ended up pulling out at the last minute. You know, so whether it was, you know, from somebody above or whoever, you know, that told him, you know, not to talk to her, you know,
Mm-hmm.
so kind of interesting too. They're definitely trying to shut her ass down, that's for sure. And
Right.
you know, when I first heard about it, it was probably the same as you. You know, I saw that little pandemic documentary trailer, which is all it is. It's just the trailer.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they ever made the full documentary, but it's just a quick 25, 26 minute uh, documentary type of video. Um, I mean, yeah, I mean, I didn't know what to think. I mean, almost immediately the the defamation stuff came out, you know, on her, and so yeah, I mean, I didn't know whether she was for real or not, but everything I've been able to dig up on her, and then of course, I mean, you always want to hear somebody out. I mean, that's a key thing that I think, for some people that have managed to stay asleep through all this. I mean, I think that's a mistake I see a lot of people making, is it's like you allow the mainstream to, um, paint a bad picture of somebody, and then you just never, you know, actually listen to what they have to say. And I have a hard time understanding that, because wouldn't, first of all, it should make you curious, you know,
Yeah.
when somebody gets outright, you know, defamed like that. Um, but what's it gonna hurt too? You know, like that's the other side of it for me. It's like I'll listen to what anybody has to say. I mean, um, you know, I've tried to check and triple check that I'm not framing Bill Gates in a bad light. You know, I've tried to really dig into him and what he's done, and what he has to say for himself. You know, like right out of his mouth. I'm not getting the same places with him as I have with Judy, but you know what I mean. It's like, don't just assume things. Like, go out and see what you can find out. Like, assume that you don't know, and
Yeah.
try to dig into it a little bit more and see what you might be able to find. Because I mean, why wouldn't you? Like, I just don't understand. Once you
Right.
get to a certain point, I mean, I get it if you're totally asleep to it, but man, if you're awake at all to the fact of corruption in our institutions, and uh, and that sort of thing, like, why would you take anybody's word for anything? You know, it just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense to me. Why wouldn't you want to find out?
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. That's the thing. Is like the only way you can really grow, is to challenge your own beliefs, and that's a very hard thing to do. I know it was very hard for me to do when I first started doing it. You know, it's like, I don't know, man. It's like there's this. It's like there's a mental block that keeps you from examining yourself. You know, like all the things that you've acquired in life, all the ideas that you've acquired all throughout life, you never really take that opportunity to stop and like really put those up to the mirror and examine them. And when I started doing that, that's when I started realizing, oh my gosh, like there's so many things that I previously thought that I don't know why I thought them. I just always thought them, you know? I never examined what I thought. I just always thought I knew that I thought it, or that I knew it. you know. It was just a foregone conclusion that, hey, I know this. And a lot of things in my life over the last 10 years, when I sit down and examine and re-examine them and dig into them, I've grown so much in the sense that I realized how stupid some of the ideas that I had were. You know what I mean? It's the only way you can grow is, approaching it. I think that's why in scriptural text they talk so much about having a childlike mind when you're approaching new things. Have that sense of wonderment about it. Like, that's why a child is so much like a sponge, because they can just soak in information because it's all new to them. But when you have this predisposed idea that you've already got in your head, it doesn't allow you to approach new topics with an open mind because you think you already know.
Right.
I think it's important.
Yeah, exactly. And there's deep psychological reasons for that. That's just part of our evolution of consciousness, and I don't know if I can do the concepts justice, but I do understand them. And it makes perfect sense why that's the case. And there's a couple different ways that you can look at it. I like the way Jordan Peterson describes it, where it's like, if you imagine your psyche, particularly your ego, which is your consciousness itself, the pinpoint of your consciousness. It it over time anyway, as you develop, it builds walls around you, and it's like a series of walls. Though, if you imagine like yourself in the center, and these walls are all circles around you, and there's walls that go out and out and out, starting with that inner wall, which is the things that you know for sure, right? And then each layer beyond that, it goes from the things that you know for sure to the things that you kind of know to the things that you don't know much about, all the way out to the things that you don't even know that you don't know, right? I mean, it's the complete unknown at those farthest out reaches, and those walls are a protection mechanism between all of that, and just because those things that are in that central wall, let's say, are things that you consider fundamental. Those are the things that you know for sure, right? The problem with that is that those things that you know for sure aren't necessarily things that you know for sure. They might actually be out a lot closer to the unknown, and that can just be simply because they're so complicated. But it's a defense mechanism in a sense for us, that, like I said, we've evolved as consciousness has evolved, that help you define the space that you inhabit, and so sometimes there's things that are so complicated that they can't be encapsulated in that wall of things that you know for sure, but they live there in your mind simply as a defense mechanism. And like religion is a super good example of that, like just your religious beliefs, especially if you happen to be like a more fundamental religious person. But religion, by definition, regardless of what you think you know about it, actually extends out all the way out into the unknown by definition, right? And so it's not one of those things that you can encapsulate in that first wall. You can have some of it there, but you also have to realize that the walls don't actually work for that sort of thing by definition. And there's all kinds of things that are so complicated that you can't withhold them in that space of the things that you know for sure. But we have that tendency to do that as a defense mechanism, and you don't have to be religious. That was just an example. So say you're not religious at all, it's probably going to be your ideological beliefs, which are typically like your political, social, cultural beliefs that inhabit that space. But the reality is that they're so complicated that they they don't belong there as a whole, you know. I mean, you can know some things for sure, but you can't know it all because it's just way too complicated. There's too many things that you just don't know, you know. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's why, I think that's why, like we've talked about, that it's so important. Well, and you said the same thing here with your scriptural reference of having a childlike mind. I mean, another way of saying that is having the attitude of the fool, and to assume that you don't know, and also not be afraid to be a fool. And so that really is the right approach to anomalous information, you know. And then
Mm-hmm.
to like tie that back into the situation that we're in right now, would be this. I mean, just think about all the things that are going on right now in response to this pandemic that just don't, I mean, there's something about it. Even if you've been a mainstream person your whole life, isn't there just like so many things about it that just don't add up? Like, why would they do that like this? You know, that's an
Yeah.
anomaly. That's a novel idea, or a novel, a bit of novelty that is pressing in on you, and pressing in on that fundamental attitude that encapsulates those things that you assume that you know for sure. But those things are knocking on the door. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's time to let down that wall and start to observe these things. And I really think that it's going to come down to whether we as a as a mass of people actually do that, actually put ourselves in the role of the fool and allow some of that novelty to come in, and to actually dig into that and try to find out what the heck is going on, and try to define that, try to encapsulate it in a way that you can make sense out of it. And if we do that, then we should all wake up and be able to fight this with the information, with the truth. And if we don't, dude, I mean, I don't want to over exaggerate, but I honestly think that all hope is gone if we don't. We are
Yeah.
headed for chaos. We are headed for chaos.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yep, that's absolutely true. Um, People just got to wake up and realize it's not a crime to analyze and question things. You know, it's kind of our responsibility to do so. So,
Yeah.
the way of describing it as the fool, that's perfect. And you and I have both discussed that whole concept in the tarot, which that'll get people talking. Uh, the tarot, tarot cards for people listening, which everybody thinks it's like fortune telling and all this stupid crap, but no, it's a psychological tool. It was based on ancient psychology, and that the Fool's card is basically the card that describes exactly what you're saying. That fool's mentality. But there's always a positive and a negative aspect. So yeah, there's a negative aspect to being a fool, but there's also a positive aspect, and that positive aspect is exactly what we were talking about: having that childlike mind. Approaching things as if you were a fool, so that way your mind's open enough to take it in as a new subject. You know, I always laugh when somebody brings up tarot and thinks it's like fortune telling. It aggravates me because it's actually just a psychological tool. It's something to show you something about yourself. It's just a tool to get you to think about certain things in your own life. That's really all it is. You know what I mean? So it's kind of funny to me when people think it's like this magic witchcraft thing. It's like, no, I think you're missing the point of what it's actually for. You know what I mean? And I'm not like a big
Well,
tarot guy, but I do find it interesting that
yeah.
it really is just it's a psychological tool to get you to examine your life.
Yeah, and you know more about that than I do, but isn't the fool card or whatever it's referred to as, isn't it also the hero? Isn't that the flip side of the fool?
You know what? I don't really know. I'd be speaking out of turn if I said yes, but I think there is another card maybe called the hero. I'm not really sure because I haven't looked at a deck in a really
Oh,
long time, but
maybe the hero card actually has the picture of the fool on it or something like
I'm
that.
not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure actually, to be honest with
Yeah,
you.
it'd be interesting. It'd be interesting to look at that. Now,
Okay.
another question that's related but kind of off topic. Isn't that why like decks of cards? Isn't that the origin of like the decks of the 52 card playing deck that we play with now? In this, at least in the sense of how they're like the same upside down, whichever way you turn them, it's the same, or is that nothing to do with it?
I know that explanation has been given for where we actually get our playing cards from, and I think it's probably a pretty credible explanation. I know. I think there's a whole section about that in this. I think it's in the Secret Teachings of All Ages. I think Manly P. Hall wrote about it, and I
Mm-hmm.
think he gave the description of the tarot cards and how we got our modern day playing cards, which he described as an adaptation of tarot cards. And
Gotcha.
I can't remember the specific breakdowns, but I think you've got diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades, and then the swords, cups, and I can't remember. It's been a long time, but anyway, they all correlate to those suits, and
Mm.
then you know jacks correlate to something. It's been so long I can't remember, but there is a correlation there, and I do honestly think that is where we got our modern day playing cards from. It was just an adaptation of tarot cards.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff in all that if you get into it. That's another thing. I mean, I'm glad we brought this up because a previously held belief of mine was that tarot cards are for fortune telling and oh yeah, it's just a bunch of this gypsy mumbo jumbo magic witchcraft whatever. It's not. It's not. It's for people interested in psychology and philosophy. That's what it is. It's a tool for that. That's all it is. You know, it's a tool to get you to think about yourself. There's certain um, there's certain attributes given to each specific card, and then if that card is flipped up or down in a certain way, it has a positive and a negative attribute of that card. And then I don't know enough about it to really get into depth, but I know that either in the way that the cards are laid out, if it's laid out in a specific pattern, depending on which type of layout you're doing, you just take the attribute of that card and think about if that represents anything in your own life that's going on at the time. And if it is, could it point you in the direction of, you know, getting you to think deeper about that specific thing that's happening in your life? You know, I don't know if I don't know if that's a good way to explain it, but That's basically what it's for. It's to get you to examine yourself based on these different attributes on the cards that were flipped up. And there's kind of like this mystical uh, aura to it because you don't know which cards are going to come up, right? So
Right.
then when one does come up and it's like a perfect match to what's going on in your life, and it really sparks that, it gets the wheels turning in your head over a topic that's really happening in your life at the time. It's not that it was magic. It's just that these are archetypes. These cards represent certain archetypes. You know, we're operating on an archetypal pattern in our life. There's certain archetypes that constantly present themselves within our everyday actions, thoughts, whatever. So, when one hits, that really sparks something in your mind and makes you think about something in a way that you haven't thought about it before, then it's kind of like, oh, wow, that just sparked this idea in my mind and got me to examine something that's going on in my life in a different way. So it's just a psychological tool to kind of help you examine things that are going on in your life. So I do want to learn more about it.
Yeah.
I've been interested in it, even though I don't know a lot about it. So
Yeah, that's it. That's interesting, and especially the examining yourself part that could do, a lot of us some good. I mean, it's forever the case too. I mean, I'm not necessarily
mhm.
saying just because of the situation that we're in, but it's certainly something that we've kind of let fall by the wayside for sure, and I would say is part of the reason that we're in the situation we're in. Now, I do have a question for you,
Oh
and
yeah,
that kind of
bring it on.
reminds me of it. And one of the things that Carl Jung said that I think one of the many great things that he said was, you should know the myth. You should know the myth that you're living. You know, and he meant that personally, but obviously it works at every level.
Mhm.
But he said you should know the myth you're living because it might be a tragedy, right? And so if
Mhm.
you were able to realize that, obviously then you could do something about it instead of, wandering on, not recognizing what myth you're living. And inevitably you are living a myth because it's archetypal. All those myths are archetypal. And like you
Absolutely.
just mentioned, an archetype is just a common human experience. It's an experience that happens across time to all of us. And so my question would be is, I know you know a lot about mythology and philosophy. Is there anything that comes to mind when you think about, what underlies the situation that we're in today? Is there a myth or an idea or anything like that comes to mind that you could talk about that would, maybe shed some light on it and maybe some insight for people, to maybe think about or even meditate on later on?
Mhm. See what I thought you were going to ask me is what myth am I personally living out? And I was going to tell you probably Sleeping Beauty because I can't get enough sleep, man. Not not that not that I'm Sleeping Beauty because ain't nothing beautiful about me, but man, I'm getting my sleep in. I'm telling you that right now. But but
That's
too
funny.
much
And hey,
probably.
let me just point out before you answer that my question was a lot better than yours. I hated your question. So
Yeah,
next
yeah.
time, if you're willing to have me on again, next time you better have a better one
Well,
for me.
what do you mean? What do you mean? Have you on? I mean, this is your show just as much as it is mine. So I mean,
Oh,
this is a
oh,
joint effort here.
geez.
But
I I don't feel like I earned that, but I'll
oh, you
take it,
earned it,
sure.
man. You earned it for me asking you that shitty question. Man, I just knew I just knew you liked The Office. And I saw that. I was like, man, all right. Let's see what Justin thinks about this dude. But
I'm not educated enough to know what I think about that.
Yeah, and you know me either. I didn't even look into it. I just saw Steve Carell, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. Because I always kind of thought about him. Man, I don't know why I would have thought about him a little bit different. Like, and then maybe I'm just like projecting something onto him that I think. Because here I'm thinking like he's bailing these like radical socialists out of jail or Antifa crowd, you know. Because and maybe that's not the case at all. So that's just that's my inherent bias, which I shouldn't have projected on it anyway. But that's just the first thing I thought of. But anyway, geez, what myth are we living? We're living all of them. You
Right.
know, we're living all of them constantly.
Yeah.
They all play a role in what's going on in not only our lives, but on a societal level, on even on a scientific level, you know, as far as natural science goes. You know, we're constantly living out all of these myths, and each person has their role. And yeah, I mean, the myths are just the archetypes in story form, you know, and the archetypes are ever present. Therefore, these archetypes are constantly being cycled through. And I don't think there's any way to escape that. I mean, that's just the reality of the situation, is that the archetypes are ever present. And, you know, depending on which part of history you're in, you know, a certain archetype is definitely more highlighted in that specific instance in history. I'd have to really, it'd take a little bit of trying to break it down and really think about it to actually pin down where we're at right now. But I mean, even in trying to examine that, it's like we're not necessarily in one spot of it, because they're all kind of ever present at the same time. It's like you've got this one gigantic myth that you could apply to what's going on in the entire world, but it's kind of fractals within fractals. So, you know, I mean, at the macro level of what's going on in society, there's probably a specific myth, or, you know, certain archetypes that are more prominent that are going on. But then you break it down within, you know, certain groups of people and the way they interact. Which archetype is predominant in their society, you know, and then which archetype is, you know, which one's standing out in this other society, and then which one's standing out in just your group of friends. What myth is playing out within your own circle, and then which myth is playing out within your own psyche and within your own, you know, personal thoughts. And I mean, that's the way I look at it. It's these archetypes are ever present on many different levels. So I don't know. I wish I could give a more specific answer on where I think we're at.
Right.
Right now,
I
I
think
mean, I just
I
one
think that's
more.
a I think that's a great technical answer for sure. Go ahead though. Keep going. Don't let me stop you if you had something else you wanted to say.
Well, I mean, I just thought about it. Um, this just came to my mind, and it's like, when you look at where we're at right now as a society, I almost could see the possibility of where we're at. I mean, it really depends on which way this goes. It kind of depends on who wins, you know. Um, do the ideas win, or does the authoritarianism win? And the authoritarianism's been winning for a long time. So this idea, this sleeping giant that's been growing, you know, there's myths about that, about the sleeping giant that's finally awakened. I mean, society might be that sleeping giant that fee fi fo fum. Now I wake up and freaking turn this system on its head. That might be something to think about. Also, something that might be worth thinking about is, these myths also attribute to largely the movements of the sun. A lot of our myths were written in regards to the sun and the solar journey. They call it the hero's journey, and that the sun is the hero. It goes through its 12 steps. It goes through its 12 labors, which are the 12 signs of the zodiac, and each sign of the zodiac represents a specific battle, if you will, a specific archetype that you're going through. So each constellation is a different backdrop for that hero to do battle in, right? So as the sun moves through those constellations, it has its, if you personify that, the sun as a character, and if you look at the constellations as backdrops that the character is traveling through in different circumstances, different archetypes, if you will, that character, the sun, is traveling through, then it's possible that in society we are right now, if you want to use the Christian mythos to describe it, it's very possible that we are Jesus in the cave right now. That's very possible. Very possible that we are Jesus in the cave right now, and that we're getting ready, or maybe it's just fall time, or not fall time. Maybe it just passed the equator into winter time, and maybe we haven't yet been crucified, and maybe we're really about to get freaking crucified as a society. Because think of it this way: if you're following the sun around that journey, it's like it's almost like the end of summer has just come, and now we just entered winter time. And it's like when you pass that equator, it's like, oh man, people just understood now what's going on, And it all depends on how you look at the myth, because it can be reversed too. So on one hand, you could say you were blinded by the light. You were blinded by the light because it was summertime, right? Summertime's the time of works. Wintertime's the time of contemplation, right? Because you're not working. And this is only one way to look at it. It can actually be looked at in the opposite way too. Because that's the cool thing about this philosophy, is that depending on which perspective you want to take, there's positive aspects to both and there's negative aspects to both. So if you're looking at it like the summertime is the time of works, the time of vigor, and the time of light where things grow and people are out working, and what else are you doing? In summertime, you're running the town, you're distracted by a lot of things, right? It's the time for work. Historically, during the season, I mean, especially back when you had to be working in the fields all summer long, So if you apply this to the mythology, you're kind of wrapped up in all that summer entails. Now, when wintertime comes, it's a time of contemplation, because they weren't doing all, you were raising your crops and reaping what you've sown and getting ready for winter. And then wintertime, you were just, that was the time for survival. That was the time of darkness, but the time of darkness is also the time for contemplation. So if you look at it, when the sun passes that equator and goes down, and I'm just speaking from the perspective of, I'm using the geocentric model right now just because it's easier to explain that way. Obviously, the sun's not moving, but you know what I'm saying. So when the sun passes that equator and goes down into the winter months, then is the time for contemplation. So one way to describe it is we've been blind all summer long, just eating or, reaping, working, reaping. They call it the time of works. And so maybe we're in that time where we're just getting close to being crucified. Maybe everybody's kind of waking up. Everybody's contemplating something, and maybe they're going to come back. We're about to get stung by the scorpion, about to be betrayed by somebody and crucified. And it might get real bad for humanity. Or, I don't know, maybe we're already past that part. It's hard to tell where you're at in the myth, but,
Yeah. Yeah, that's an interesting question for sure. I mean, it could be both. I could see how, yeah, we're right on the brink. Then at the same time, I'd rather hope that we're just about to rise above the horizon here. So I guess we'll find out.
Right. So that's the thing. I mean, and when you look at it, it's like, okay, well, we've already been betrayed and sold out. We've already been Judas by traitors in our own government. We've basically already been crucified by these same bastards who did it. So that's what kind of leads me to believe that maybe we're in the cave right now. Maybe we're in the cave. And here's the opposite interpretation from what I was just saying, from that interpretation, when you look at it as the summertime is a time of distraction, a time of, you're distracted with all the works you're doing. It can also be looked at in the opposite way, whereas, just depending on your perspective, because the winter is time of darkness. Well, death is attributed to darkness, right? Time of death, the time of total darkness and blindness. You can't see in the dark, right? You can't see in the dark. You're totally blind. There's no sun to light the path. Now, let's not get it twisted, though, because what I was just saying before, what can also blind you? You can be blinded by the light, wrapped up like a douche. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? I don't think that's what it says, but you know what I'm saying, right? So you can also be blinded by the light, right? So there's two different perspectives. There's a positive and negative perspective to the light side, and there's also a positive and negative aspect to the darkness. And they're basically a reflection of one another. They can each have their bad, and they can each have their good. So whereas wintertime, or the time of darkness, is the time of reflection, that's a good aspect, but it's also a time of darkness. So if you don't use it properly, it can be a time of darkness and death. But what's interesting about that time of darkness and death is that when speaking about the solar science aspect of it, when on December 25th, when the sun hits that winter solstice point and starts moving 1 degree north and starts moving toward its ascent back up toward the summer months, it's actually heading toward spring. That part right there, the winter solstice and the vernal equinox share a lot in common because they're both points that are heading back to the ascent, right? The summer solstice and the autumn equinox both share things in common in the sense that they are both now heading towards the darkness, right? So you've got degrees, but if you break it down into that pie, the summer solstice and the autumn equinox share in the sense that they're both heading toward darkness, right? So that's why, you can call the winter solstice and the vernal equinox, they're parallel to each other. So the ascent, like when Jesus is in the cave and then they come and see that he's risen again or whatever, that's him rising on that degree, heading up it's the rebirth of the sun. That's that's why it's December 25th. We celebrate Christmas on, is because that rebirth of the actual sun happens on that solstice point.
Right.
And there's many ways to break that down too. It's just wheels within wheels, and then some say those 3 months between the winter solstice and the vernal equinox, those 3 months are actually the 3 days that he was in the cave. That's those 3 days. And then at Easter, then you've got his resurrection. Now that's on, if you look at it from one perspective, that's one scale of it, but it's always wheels within wheels. So the 3 days in the cave are actually 3 days as well. And it's the 3 days that the sun stays on the same degree, right? So it just matters on which level of the cycle you're looking at it. Essentially, the winter solstice and the vernal equinox are essentially the same concept, just depending on which, it's kind of hard to describe, but depending on which perspective you're looking at it. Are you looking at small cycle or big cycle? Because the 3 days in the cave can actually be 3 days, because the sun does stay on the same degree for 3 days before it moves past that winter solstice point and starts ascending back up towards the spring and summer months. Or if you want to look at it on a grander scale, the 3 days in the tomb are the 3 months heading up towards the spring. And then when it passes that equator, then that's the resurrection point. All these myths tie into different solar aspects of mythology and stuff like that. It's very possible that we could be in that cocoon stage. I mean, that's another way to describe the myth. It's like we're a caterpillar who is in a cocoon, and we are in that cave, the cave Jesus is in, the cave that the sun's in at the winter solstice. That's the cocoon. And what comes out of the cocoon? A butterfly, a renewed being. That could be where society's at right now. We might be on the brink of a renewed society, or the betterment of everybody. I hope that's where we're at. That'd be great.
Yeah. Yeah, that sounds nice.
Yeah, I mean, what could be better, right?
Yeah.
Spread your wings and fly.
Right. I mean, what it made me think about, I didn't really like the idea at first, but it definitely makes a lot of sense. I mean, you could use all sorts of different myths to describe it too. You just happen to focus on the solar one, but yeah, it does make a lot of sense that we've just been betrayed, and really, I mean, it sucks a little bit, but I think it probably is time to take the sins of the world upon our shoulders and go through the crucifixion here, sacrifice ourselves for the betterment of mankind, and out of that, we'll rise again. So I think that's where we're at. I think it actually is time that we start making some serious sacrifices here. And you could say it a different way. You could say that we know the dragon's out there, and it's time to gear up and go out and face it. And I don't mean that in any sort of violent way. I just mean, that it's time to, metaphorically gear up and go out and face what it is that we've been kind of trying to pretend isn't there for a long time. So,
man,
you can't face the dragon if you won't admit that it's there, right? So
yeah. I like the way you tied that in with the element of self-sacrifice. Like I didn't even think of that when I was going through that, but that's exactly what we're doing right now. So that makes perfect sense. You know,
Yeah.
we're just now figuring out that we've been, well, I mean, a lot of people have been paying attention to it for a long time. So there's, many of us who have been studying it have seen the betrayal for some time now. But yeah, man, it just seems like as a whole, humanity is now really starting to see through all this bullshit with the COVID-19 stuff. It's like everybody's waking up. Everybody's now kind of realizing, like, man, we've been betrayed. We've been sold out. And then, man, that's just perfect. You're like, you talking about yeah, I mean, it's time for people to step up now that we know we've been betrayed. It's time to step up and self-sacrifice and do the things that previously maybe you wouldn't. Like, I mean, I personally, I don't really, it's not me to be putting myself out there and be doing YouTube videos and stuff like that. I mean, that's just not me. I'm a pretty quiet person. I like to keep to myself. I'd much rather have it that way. So, and I know you're pretty much the same way too. But I mean,
Yeah.
it gets to a point where you've got to do what's right and you've got to try to reach people in whatever way you can. And that's kind of a form of, just putting all your stuff that bothers you to the side because there's a larger goal to attain. By doing so, it's like now's not the time to be self-conscious. Now's not the time to think about these petty things that'll hold you back. It's really time for everybody to just put it on the line, because what have you got to lose at this point? If we don't do it, we've got a lot to lose. We've got our country to lose. We've got our society that men have fought and died for to secure our liberties. Now is not the time to be worried about, petty things. Step up and have those conversations with family members. Be willing to look like the fool, because like I've said plenty of times before, I would rather look like a fool now than to know I'm a fool sitting in some quarantine camp, 2 years down the road, or whenever they really roll this stuff out that they're planning. And they are planning it, you know.
Yeah, make no mistake about that. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So man, that tied that together real nice, because yeah, I like that. That's so that's something that just it skipped past me. I didn't even think
Yeah,
of that.
it's
So,
time to, not only is it time to self-sacrifice, but the other part of that too, it's also time to go down into the underworld, you know, to go into the place of suffering voluntarily, which is kind of like the going out and fighting the dragon thing, because we need to rescue
right.
our dead father from the belly of the whale. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it, there's so many myths that tie together and kind of tell you, and that's why I knew if I asked you the question that you'd get into something that underlies it and points a way forward. I mean,
Right.
and that is the case. It's time to self-sacrifice. We've been betrayed. It's time to self-sacrifice, go down in the underworld and rescue our dead father. And for those that don't know, your dead father is your culture,
Mm-hmm.
because your
Right.
culture is always dead. The people that provided you with your culture are dead. They can't revitalize it for you. You have to do it. It's a constant
Right.
battle. Keep it vibrant and alive, because you're always resting on your dead ancestors and what they built for you.
Right.
And if you
Definitely.
don't do that, you'll find yourself in a situation very much like we're in now, and it's happened over and over and over again. That's why those myths always work, man. We've got thousands and thousands and thousands of years of experience with how it works, so it's no
Right.
wonder.
And each and every one of us is the culmination of all of our dead ancestors. We are we are the living representation, the living reflections of all of our ancestors. We share their genetics. We are the living precipice in history, if you want to call it that. We are all of our ancestors. We are the complete culmination of all of them. We've got their DNA. We've got all their racial memories and ancestral memories embedded within us, within our DNA. We essentially are them. They are essentially living through us right now
Right.
because of the way genetics work. You know, it's so amazing when you start thinking about it that way. And if we do not do what they were willing to do to secure this for us, we are betraying them. We're letting them down. You know,
Yes.
um, I mean, it's interesting because all that stuff, rescuing your dead father from the belly of the whale, that all ties right into the solar myth too.
Yep.
The belly of the whale is the lowest part in the wintertime, you know,
Yep.
the heading to the underworld. The underworld is that when you cross that equator and you start going into the darkness, and then you're headed down towards that lowest part. That's why that glyph, the solar glyph, is such an important template for all of these different myths. It's just like we were talking about, last week sometime. We've talked about it several times, but um, the fact that everything has fragmented, and you think about the myth of Osiris being chopped up into like 14 pieces or whatever it was, and then uh, Isis and Horus having to search for the pieces, or what was it? No, Isis searched for the pieces and then put put Osiris back together, and through this miraculous sexual um, experience, had baby
Creative.
Horus. Right, right. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's where we're at. I mean, we're essentially Isis right now, collecting all these pieces, these fragmented pieces, and literally remembering the body. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Taking
Right.
those, taking all of his members that have been chopped off and scattered to the winds and piecing them back together. And it's just like Plato always said, you know, us as humans, us as, the essence of us is a spiritual essence. We are something greater than the body, and we're made already knowing everything. Our soul already knows everything. It's just a matter of remembering that. And there's a psychological myth embedded in that as well. A psychological, a spiritual. I mean, they all really tie together. They're fractals of one another. It's a giant multi-layered analogy that
Mhm.
when you start getting into it, I mean, it's so deep, and it speaks to so many different levels of being and understanding. It's pretty amazing stuff.
That it is. Yep.
Yes, sir. So on that note, man, I mean, we're approaching 2 hours and 5 minutes now, coming
All
right up
right.
on it. Is there any other points you want to make before we wrap this thing up, or
Well, I think that's a good place to end it. I think I'm good.
sounds good,
Until
man?
next time.
Right. I mean, we got to leave something for next time. We covered a pretty wide range of different topics here. I mean, I think I think it's some pretty good content. Before we leave, just want to shout out to everybody. Just if you like the content we're making, I mean, this is our first episode, basically. I mean, uh, we actually do have a pilot episode that we did that we might end up uploading as well. So, but if you like the content we're making, if you like the stuff that we're discussing, just remember to hit like, subscribe, and hit that bell notification so we can continue bringing you guys good content that you want to hear. Hopefully, it's interesting. And until next time.
Yeah, sounds great. And you know, don't hesitate to put comments down below too if you guys have anything you want to add or any questions or anything like that. We'll try to interact with you and we'll just keep on going if we can.
Yeah, man. Sounds good. All right, buddy, man. I will talk to you later.
All right, sounds great. Have a good night, man.
All right, take it easy. Talk to you next time.
Yep.